Let's bring in Alan Moran from Regulation Economics. Good to talk to you again, Alan. How would you describe the energy crisis we're facing right now and how we got here?
Well, it's one created by politicians like Matt Keane, who was on your programme there. How we've got here is the meddling in the commercial market for energy, for both gas and electricity, which has been taking place over the last 20 years. I noticed in this energy ministers meeting, and I think we have to be very, very afraid when energy ministers are meeting, because they're likely to do even worse than they've done so far. Before this meeting, Lily D'Ambrosio, the Victorian minister, said, "Oh, we've got to divert the gas from exports into the local usage." This is the woman who was part of a government which has stopped the search and development of gas for the last 10 years. Not only in Victoria, but also New South Wales and South Australia are in the same boat. So that's one fundamental cause of the crisis we face. But the overall crisis is as a result of governments meddling, largely because they want to inject subsidised renewable energy into the system. And this prevents the coal generators, which are 60 or 70% of our supply, stops them from operating profitably. And the subsidised renewables require immense additional spending on batteries and on transmission. The Labour Party is actually saying, well, we're going to spend $80 billion on new transmission. That's 4 times what we presently spend on transmission, and it still won't work. Essentially, we've got a system now which has been destroyed by government and is likely to be further destroyed. I mean, one fears what's going to come out of this meeting. They're likely to put all sorts of price controls on, or the sorts of D'Ambrosio idea of diverting coal from export markets into the local markets. That's a surefire way of dissuading firms from undertaking the very expensive exploration and development activity which we basically need.
But this is the incredible thing about this, already after 10 or 15 years of these policies, we don't have enough coal-fired generation or gas-fired generation to sustain a market with 25% renewable share. Yet they want to get to 80% renewable. It is literally impossible and absurd, isn't it?
It is impossible. And indeed, to get to 80% renewables, they've got to firm it up. And 80% renewables means a whole lot of batteries, and it means the sort of transmission expenditure that I've spoken about. Batteries alone, to actually give you 4 hours of firming for when there's a wind drought, that would cost $50 billion. I mean, this is money just being thrown up in the air by governments, by ministers saying, well, we've got to do this to actually correct a policy, not even to correct it, but to offset the disadvantageous, the deleterious effects of the policies which they've been putting in place over the last 20 years. I mean, it is madness.
Sorry, just to interrupt, but we've got more coal-fired power stations due to retire. Eventually, the aim is to get rid of all coal-fired power stations. But doesn't today's crisis demonstrate that we've already mothballed too much coal generation?
Yes, of course we have. Of course we have. We shouldn't be. I mean, when we're talking about this transition to renewables, I mean, basically it's a transition to a much more expensive form of electricity than the one we had already. I mean, the future probably of electricity could well be nuclear, but the present and the next 2 decades is certainly going to be coal, and we've vilified the coal generators. We've prevented them from getting access to new sources of coal themselves, which is creating some of the difficulties we're facing right now. And we've basically, because we've taken away, if you like, their social license, so that banks won't lend to them and they can't get insurance cover and a whole lot of things like that, which has actually just crucified an industry which was and should still be the best, most competitive in the world, because we're following some sort of dogma of 0 by 2050 and 82% and figures thrown around like that by people who do not know what they're talking about and do not know how to operate a system. And these people have been in control for 20 odd years, and they have driven it into the dangerous situation that we now have and the very high costs. We will see. We see the prices on the spot market are now 7 or 8 times what they were just a couple of years ago. That will be reflected in bills. The prices may come down. Who knows? I don't think they will, but bills will go up. The bills, which were, say, $1,500 a year or so ago, will be doubled in the next year or so. There is no other alternative unless the government subsidises it, in which case the bills come from your taxes rather than your electricity usage.
Alan, what a shambles. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.